Welcome everybody to this lecture from Brent Cooper with Brent Cooper, Abstraction in Action. I'm really excited that you do this. You reached out to this whole thing together because you reached out and you wanted to do something together, and this might be the first step in doing, a cooperation together, doing some courses. Whatever will appear. Again, thank you, Brent, that you're doing this, and I give you the floor. You can start now.
Okay, let me just screen share. There it is. Okay, so I'm starting on Tom's link just to sort of orient us with what I promised. Abstraction in action, from process to paradigm. And so this is the preamble from that link. I don't know if I'll talk for 90 minutes. I want to make this a little more interactive, but there's so much to talk about. My goal at first here is just to get through the basics, so then we can expand, so I can deliver this stuff I promised. It's essential. Consciousness of abstracting, Korzybski, Bill Sharp, Scott McCloud's visual grammar. These are all the first few slides in a wider presentation. How do we spot bad abstractions or misabstractions in policy, media, discourse? There is a lot of bad abstraction out there. Let me just start there, because that's what abstraction as a tool has helped me evaluate. Like, it's the ultimate kind of epistemology, but it's also very misleading and very slippery. Like, abstraction, what are we talking about? It's not the concrete. It's a representation, right? So it's always going to be problematic. So first things first, we have to define it. The core definition is the etymological one, the linguistic one, where this word comes from, what it means. To draw away from, to draw off, in a double sense of drawing away from the object, and to withdraw from the senses. And so you can imagine all of early human history, and a lot of philosophers and cognitive scientists talk about this, what it means to be human. I think John Locke said beasts abstract not, but this is something that's difficult to map into simplistic frames. I'm going to talk about the four quadrants, but something like integral, I think, would try to capture this in a particular stack or set of stages. I'm going to look at it like a 12-layer stack. But my point is, there's always something arbitrary about how we're framing that. It can always be different. So when we make or use an abstraction, we should want it to be very exacting, very consistent. So that brings us to the second definition. It's just another order of abstraction and way to define it. It's a conceptual process of complexity reduction that highlights the essential properties or first principles of a given object or idea. So that's a fairly universal and utilitarian definition of the mental process of abstraction. And then a third layer of this concept is it means many different things. So where do we even begin with that? It'll have a different basic definition in math, in computer science, in linguistics, neuroscience, psychology, philosophy, social theory. So I want to try to touch on a lot of those without losing coherence. And then a fourth possible, even more vague, even more abstract, meta-abduction, meta-abstraction. So that's one way to approach it. Another way is visually. And this is from a book called Understanding Comics, in which there's a lot of great diagrams and explanations. This is one of the simplest ones. This is called the total is the pictorial vocabulary. Scott McCloud calls it. So we have here reality in the bottom left. And then our brains are trying to interface that between language and the picture plane. So in the picture plane, you have all this abstraction in the most symbolic or fundamental sense. Color, shape, form, texture, pattern, breaking down the specifics of reality into those things. So we do it in art. We also do it in ideas, in philosophy, in language. And so I like this because it's blank in the middle. I'll zoom in on the more detailed one where it's all filled in with different comic characters. But I want listeners to meditate for a second on like what can take place in here, not just in the visual sense, but in the intellectual sense, when we're trying to grapple with concepts and interface between reality. We always want to get closer to reality and demystify things, and how that relates to the background of abstraction up here in the picture plane. So before I get too far ahead of myself, I'll define some of these things by way of little detours here. Consciousness of abstraction. This is from Bill Sharp from the Korzybski Institute. And this is an excerpt right off the bat. He starts talking about how what people mostly think of, it's not wrong, but they'll think of abstract as meaning ephemeral, metaphysical, even mystical, or we may think of abstract painting, surrealism, cubism, Picasso. When you Google it, this is certainly the kind of stuff that comes up first, and it's not wrong. There it is, but it's a misdirect. It confuses what the greater depth of abstraction can be. So I have here this kind of meme to say like, let's not get trapped in the abstraction of it, in the shapes, colors, symbols, forms sense, and let's look for definition, precision, utility, function, clarity. Because as he says here, abstract is a multi-ordinal term. It has many meanings, many levels of meaning. And that's key for this, but it's also true for many ordinary things. So multi-ordinal is true for abstract things, like we're talking about, this concept. But I'll get into a little bit later. Think of something like balls or boxes and how many things that can refer to. How many balls you can think of on the spot, how many different types. So that makes all those things multi-ordinal, having different meanings in different contexts. And he says here, it is absolutely crucial that we comprehend the difference and gain a good appreciation of the full range of abstraction, to be conscious of the process and the effects of abstract thinking. I recommend going and reading this short little chapter / blog post for this reason. It's I couldn't write a better article. This is one of many of my sources on this concept that gives us a way in. And this is a good way just to show, like in contrast with this abstraction, which is not wrong, it's just different. This is also abstraction. And we're going for more fidelity and veracity. Like this plane's not going to fly if everything's not exact. And I want people to keep in mind some sort of correspondence between this thing's only going to work if it's good abstraction, and public discourse as well. Public discourse, when, we're only going to understand each other and functionally work together if the abstractions are sound. And the human body is a great one because there's so many layers to it, so many systems upon systems the skeletal system, the nervous system, the respiratory system, the circulatory system. We are products of evolutionary abstraction long before we ever have the capacity to think about it. More definition on multi-ordinal there. It's going to very quickly feel like abstraction overload. So, you can get a sense of vertigo. So I want to just give that warning up front. So coming back to here, what else? Yeah, that's about it for that. So the abstraction letter, I think the source's name is Hayakawa, but there's many ways you can slice this. This is a classic depiction where the object or the subject is Bessie the cow, source of food, source of animal products, but different orders of abstraction, different meanings, right? Bessie is the individual cow. Even below that, prior to our label and our experience of it, there is just the cow, the cow in front of us. The object of experience that our nervous system abstracts from the totality that constitutes the process cow. Just bear with me. As we go up, we get some specificity, but then it goes into higher categories, like what makes all cows cows? And then what makes all of those livestock, where you'd group in, goats and other things like that. And then farm assets. And then in a higher level, again, an asset. And this is such a great example, right? Because we live in capitalism, hyper-capitalism, where everything is, in some sense, reduced to its use or exchange value and the pursuit of wealth. And wealth itself, like when you get there, if you get there, the rich people, the billionaires, they're not necessarily better ethical abstractors, obviously, but they are abstracting very effectively at business, at the art of war, if you will. And it abstracts them from society as people too. Like they'll become more alienated and more powerful, but detached from the concrete because they have all this money. So I don't want to get too off track on that, but the latter is important because we should always look at everything through this lens, that it's on a continuum of labels and uses. So this one is 8 rungs, but I think a better one is 12. And this is where the idea of, my subtitle from process to paradigm is going to be salient. So primordial abstraction, and it's important that it's called abstraction, even though there's no thinking per se, but it's stuff we've broken down as through science, chemistry, physics, into patterns, into symmetry, into laws, that it's very reliable. It's very, the periodic table. We know what these things are now. And the, gravity, the way solar systems and stars and planets form, that's all primordial. And then it gives way to biological abstraction, that gives way to neurological abstraction, to behavioral. So let's have more fun with it and look at it in this visual stack. I built this app. We're going to talk a little bit about vibe coding, but primordial, right? We can break it down: ecological interactions, evolutionary processes, homeostasis and regulation, cellular structures, genetic encoding, and in each one, it's I generated some more sublayers. So ecological interactions, symbiosis, food webs, we're able to zoom in and out of these different layers very easily through this sort of conceptual stack. And this has been critical for me so I don't lose sight of what level, what order of abstraction I'm talking about. Sometimes it's something specific, you know, like this, and we know what we're doing, or this. But the more complex reality is something like this. And of course, when you get up to these very human layers, conceptual, theoretical, sociopolitical, right, a lot of this is socially constructed. One of my favorite examples of how we reify abstraction is in borders, right? So look at a map, right? None of that is real in the reality sense. It's social reality real. We make it, we enforce it with guards, with checkpoints, with processes, but it's in reality amenable, and it you know, like, changeable. And it should be. Like, part of the global crisis we're in is that abstraction has gotten ahead of us. We have no handle on it. It rules our lives. It always has. But the better we understand it, the more we, I said earlier, demystify, but the more we, you know, just stay grounded. Like, the world is full of, like, true believers, of flat earthers and conspiracy theorists. And it's only fun to a very short, shallow point. Like, it's really dangerous at the end of the day. And those are easy examples to debunk, but there's so many things replete with nuance that we can't agree on. Here's, you know, global health and pandemics, epidemiology. Like, if I had more here, I don't right now, but this could endlessly be expanded to be an educational tool. So yeah, to be continued on that angle. We'll come back to that if necessary, but I wanna move along. This is a fun example. Okay, I'm gonna have to. Okay, I wanted to start with a blank screen here to sort of make this a thought experiment. So I mentioned balls and boxes earlier, just as a demonstration of how quickly we can get into very high numeration or enumeration of abstract objects. Think of a ball, right? Here's a couple examples. How many can you think of off the top of your head? Ping pong ball, billiard ball, the sun, the planets. They're all different sizes of balls, but they all have, except for the football there, they're all spheres. They're all spheroid. They're made of different materials. They have different functions. These are all sports balls. How many can you think of, right? That's an interesting, albeit childish, kind of thought experiment to start being conscious of your own thinking. Okay, what about boxes, right? And these are very Platonic shapes. We got here building blocks, dice, ice cube, Rubik's cube, cardboard box, Lego. There's more. If I zoom in here, now I've added this, we can break down just the concept of what I'm trying to show, you know, just to supplement our thinking. Oh, cultural social. Oh yeah, there's masquerade ball, debutante ball, cannonball run. And under cubes, boxes, Pandora's box, soap box, Jack in the Box. So it's really endless and expansive. And if I zoom back out here, if we were to brainstorm, and perhaps with the help of AI, we could come up with, say, 500 to 1,000 examples of each, of things that are sphere or ball-like or cube and box-like. And I think that's interesting to demonstrate this enumerative abstraction, because language is super messy like this. We're abstracting all the time. You're listening to me, you're abstracting, you're thinking. And this stuff applies to concepts just as much as objects. That's what I'm trying to demonstrate with this particular slide. So that's all there is for that. Now we'll get into the quadrant stuff a little bit. This is sociologist George Ritzer. He puts the macro objective in the top left, which is going to throw a lot of integral people, but it's essential. But I'm also gonna. This is the more classic subjective interior, subjective micro, interior individual. This is a more standard approach that puts the individual first. But just keep in mind there the difference in terms of the impact of how we frame these things. So abstractions in each. I made this a few years back and called it integral abstraction, but I just, even very few social theorists get this. The classical framing is that mental abstraction is the main definition, but then along comes Marx and later Sohn-Rethel, who said, well, what if there is abstraction other than thought? What work can we make this word do? And he called it real abstraction. So that would be down in this quadrant. So framing it that way, though, is only two sides of four quadrants. Like it's still a limited framework, but that's how a lot of social theorists are operating. There is an increasing amount in the literature that talk about social abstraction and sociological and how that is relevant, and less on the physical, but there is some as well. So it's all out there, and what I've tried to do is just tie it together. So I'm going to jump from this straight to this app. This is Abstract Analyzer. Let's go like that. Oh, hold on. Sorry. So I got to exit the presenter view. Sorry, hold on. Okay. So there's some different content in these quadrants than what I was just showing, but it's more or less the same. So abstraction in the subjective is cognition, metacognition, spirituality. In the physical, it's these biological processes and also praxis to some extent. And in the intersubjective, memes, narratives, ideologies, epistemic justice, and in the interobjective, economic systems, political systems, tech. And now we're already at the point, it's a bit early, but I think we're going to be talking about this for a long time, vicious versus virtuous abstraction. So the term virtuous abstraction doesn't really exist. I'm coining it. Vicious abstraction does exist. William James sort of defined it, and I think other people have as well, but it comes from his basic definition, and we will get to that here. I'll flip back and forth a little bit, but James's definition is basically a fallacy where an idea or concept is taken out of its original context. And even in a simpler example is a quote taken out of its context, which happens all the time. It happens unintentionally. It happens on purpose. And as we're going to see, like, it's a big part of the culture war. I've written on this. I'm trying not to go backwards into what I've already written and published. There's 15 to 20 articles on abstraction. that I've written, vicious abstraction being one of them. But I'm trying to like speak from the cutting edge here and keep moving forward, because a lot of this stuff is more alive, frankly, than in going back to the articles. So taking it out of context, simplifying to the point where its original meaning is distorted or lost. Abstractions that hide essential complexity while introducing spurious precision. And just off the top of my head, right, my favorite examples are Marxism, feminism, postmodernism, all the things we heard Jordan Peterson and the intellectual dark web cry-bullying and rage whining about because they didn't understand. And complexity is a key word here. So is systems, because, you know, I recall specific episodes where Peterson and conservative pundit Andrew Sullivan were like, systemic racism isn't real because there's no systems. And, you know, what's a system? Oh, I'm so confused. Everybody spoon feed me. There are systems. There's ordinary racism and there's institutional racism or systemic racism or structural racism. So when people talk about those things from a place of not understanding, it's vicious and it has vicious effects. And there's many ways we can slice this. It reifies slogans, swaps vibes for verification. Whereas before I move on, like, what is virtuous abstraction? And how can we be so sure in all cases? I don't mean to oversimplify, right? Because I think there is a middle ground. There's a nuance. I also have a spectrum somewhere here for that virtuous versus vicious itself. To show that there's an in-between. So I won't be able to necessarily find it. So I want to go back to this. So virtuous, the goal is clarity, synthesis, emancipation, consensus. The process is revealing complexity, showing connections, drawing a way to see the whole, multi-ordinal, reflexive, dialectical, the ethos, outcome, examples. The more we have here, the more we do actually come to think in like black and white terms. And this can be good. This is what I want to highlight. But yeah, there's also nuance and we can get things wrong. But imagine if people could just agree already on this, coming from whatever background, just look at this and go, oh yeah, lying, misrepresenting something, that's probably not good. You know, maybe I should know what I'm talking about before I speak, or I should be ready to be challenged, or we should have a mediator, you know, outsource to someone else. So good examples of vicious abstraction: racist dog whistles, thought leaders selling simple solutions, greenwashing, corporate jargon. And again, when we call them abstractions, it's because they present as what they're trying to look like structurally. So corporate jargon is going to be based on like legitimate jargon. Like pseudoscience copies science. Pseudoscience tries to imitate and look like science. So for most people, even some scientists, they can't tell the difference. And that's dangerous. When you can't tell the difference, we got to zoom out. We got to audit it from all these different angles. So virtuous versus vicious. This is one way to make a methodology out of that, called paradoxical praxis. Paradoxity is a term I use in an anti-intellectualism article. It's like a portmanteau of paradox and complexity. Step one, deconstructive mapping. We kind of been over that a little bit, you know, the quadrants and the definitions. Step two, abductive synthesis. After taking the problem apart, creatively reassemble the pieces. Step 3, convergent action. So after we've done the ideational prototyping, the inference to the best explanation, let's consensus build. Let's embody it as a way of life. Right. So we're trying to foster this with virtuous abstraction. Okay, this part is a little bit interactive. If people want to drop ideas in the comments, please do, and we will just generate a response in real time. This is using an AI backend, and it will give us quadrant analysis, and it'll give us constitutive praxis suggestions. So, and I see a question there, is a balloon a ball? Sure. I mean, some balloons are more ball than others, like a yoga ball is an inflated ball. It's spherical, right? A balloon that you tie off won't be a perfect sphere, but that's, you know, what we're getting at with imagining abstraction. So, okay, let me go just put in a random idea while we're waiting. If anyone has any ideas, political economy of the culture war, analyze. And then I'll also talk about a little bit these foundational thinkers of abstraction. So the concept of political economy of the culture war posits seemingly ideological or identity-based cultural conflicts are not autonomous, but deeply intertwined with and driven by underlying economic structures, power dynamics, and material interests. So first, we just get a basic definition, answer. The classifications, whether it's virtuous or vicious, are going to vary when I phrase a question like that or a prompt like that. It's not a question that leads to a clear answer. So in this case, it's virtuous, because it's talking about the study of it, right? If I phrase it differently, like what billionaires are doing through the political economy of the culture war, like Peter Thiel, for example, what he's doing, extremely vicious, extremely vicious. So at any rate, what do we do with it? Constitutive praxis suggestion. To engage with the political economy of the culture war, we must follow the deconstruct, synthesize, act, deconstruct culture war narratives by meticulously tracing their material origins and exposing the economic and political interests they serve, rather than accepting them at face value as purely ideological. So this is a difficult move to do, but it's what a lot of leftists do all the time. And it involves tracing in unambiguous ways, like the money flows, and money is abstraction in itself, but also what is the ideological abstraction that is piggybacking all of that money, right? Like when we think of the Israel lobby, AIPAC and all that used to be called American Zionist lobby. Vicious. So that framing is vicious, or what Thiel is doing is vicious. What Thiel is doing is vicious, David. Thiel is misrepresenting the culture war. He's misrepresenting social theory, and he's got a nakedly anti-human agenda with his wealth. And, you know, he owns Palantir, but look at the CEO of Palantir, Alex Karp, like just acidic discourse there, like literally Orwellian, and just wants to like kill protesters with drones. So we're getting very far from reality when we let these people and Trumpism dictate what's going on. And they're using all of that discourse to mask what they're actually doing with policy. like Project 2025 is behind all that. So I'm going to move on a little bit here. The top 9 of these people were actually from a conference that Conrad Hamilton organized earlier this year, because he's an expert on real abstraction. So these are all experts on real abstraction. And I analyzed that. And then Jeff Sharp, Derek Sayer, Benjamin Bratton were not part of that, but they are key thinkers on abstraction. Sayer writes about the violence of abstraction. Jeff Sharp writes about constitutive abstraction, which is to do with really unpacking intellectual labor and how abstraction works in the world, how we constitute it and how it constitutes us. And it's building off Sohn Rethel's idea of real abstraction. Benjamin Bratton, I have found, has been the biggest picture thinking sociologist, scholar, as he's talked about it basically from the primordial all the way down to, or all the way up, if you will, to the speculative. And that's where I get ideas like this, and we can crystallize them. So let me come back to this. There's actually a lot here. Just going each row will give more detail on the right panel here as I click it. Core move, felt sense, map versus territory. Vicious abstraction is the map replaces the terrain, cherry picks facts, and can be instrumentalized or weaponized in counterproductive ways. In virtuous abstraction, the map is an instrument, updates with feedback, grounds truth. And just coming back to the flat Earth thing for a minute, Google Earth is the highest fidelity abstraction we have of our planetary reality, right? And you can toggle between layers. Like this expression, the map is not the territory, which comes from Korzybski, is ironically insufficient, because at a certain point, the map becomes almost more real than the territory. Almost. I mean, it never will be completely, but we can see and feel and measure the fidelity of what we're working with. It's self-evident in a way, right? Like Google Earth is self-evident, and you can zoom into like a street view almost anywhere on the planet. That's that's the frontier of technological abstraction, is it not? The use of liminality or fliminality. The vicious exploits thresholds, ambiguity as a weapon, keeps terms blurry as a flip point. Virtuous is tends those thresholds, names flip conditions. Liminality, after all, is that edge. Epistemic posture, scale fit. Like, there's a lot of interesting ways to slice this. Time horizon, institutional form. And again, none of this comparative model really existed before. As I say, there's no definition of virtuous abstraction. And we're wading into very ambitious territory to say that there is and there can be. But that's what I believe in a paradigm shift. I believe that we're not there yet, but we can keep pushing and these things will start to make more sense. And coming back to the culture war, like, this stuff outsmarts us, right? A lot of debates wouldn't even have to happen or could be resolved instantly if we had some form, some verification framework. Clearly, integral theory and the integral community fail at this regularly because they have maps and models that routinely fail to produce consistent and verifiable and inter-objective outcomes and analysis, right? And so you'll while I'm working with these layers, you won't hear me talking about like blue, green, yellow, teal, or any kind of euphemisms that are reifying and collapsing the intended meaning of those different layers, or the, coming back to this idea of orders of abstraction. Well, all those layers actually mean different things in different contexts. So moving on, to yet another way to abstract knowledge. There's other versions of this, just like there is with the Maslow's hierarchy. There's more updated, newer ones. But there's a lot of fetishization and whatnot around wisdom. And somewhere here, I have a note on the explosion of knowledge. We'll get to that. But we have to keep in mind, we have more data, more information, more collective knowledge than we've ever had before. So why is the world so dumb? Why is politics, why does it look like Idiocracy, the movie, or Team America World Police, right? We really have a lot of leakage in abstraction. In computer science, they talk about leaky abstractions. But I think the key here is to understand that is happening with philosophical and sociological and everyday abstraction. So like any of these models, right, they're only so useful insofar as you dive into it. We're continually trying to become better scientists, right? Like, oh, well, what is data? Where am I getting a data set? How am I interpreting it? How am I going up and down the levels of this pyramid, if you will? The proof is in the pudding. We need to be able to convince each other of nuanced truths and converge up here, if you will, in actual wisdom, ending war, genocide, homelessness, mental illness. So that's that. I don't want to dwell on that model too much. Here's another model, right? And by the way, anybody in these spaces giving talks are relying heavily on abstraction. And this is why we want to be able to audit it way better. I like this one, right? So what I'm getting at is with the model, I mean, there's 1,000. But why change fails, right? This is the Lippitt-Noster model. Successful change, according to this, requires all of these things: vision, consensus, skills, incentives, resources, and an action plan. If you don't have any of them, it fails for different reasons. And I love this because no vision leads to confusion. Well, sidebar, the Fliminal web, the different sense-making communities we've been a part of, there's a handful of terms, overlapping networks and people. A lot of visionary discourse, no real vision, leads to confusion. No consensus, which is something I've written on and am passionate about, consensus building. It takes effort, but it's worth the effort. Sabotage is going to be the outcome. No skills, anxiety. No incentives, resistance. And that's an important one too, because people don't necessarily see the incentives for consensus building, but so they resist. So, I want people to think as I'm going through this, does anybody object to this model? This is not my model. I think it's great. No resources, frustration. I can relate to that. That's part of the reason I fail. No action plan, false starts. So we got a lot of that. We got a lot of this failure. And that's interesting to unpack. I don't have much more to say about that. But I just thought it was a good abstraction. It's doing a lot of work in a very simple diagram. Same thing here. This one's taken from the context of education, pedagogy, transformative and mutual learning. Each layer is nested within the previous, right? So everything starts with understanding, then recognizing, then engaging. So I'm going to breeze by that. The Abstract Society, one of my favorite finds ever, because it was published in 1970. And, I'd never been taught any of this stuff on abstraction explicitly. I recognized that there was a ton of research out there, but there was a kind of opportunity and a void where that stuff was not organized into a paradigm. That's what I'm trying to do, trying to take it from process to paradigm. And books like this are key in the literacy of that journey. Here's an excerpt. In every modern industrial state, more and more individuals find themselves confronting and revolting against an abstract entity, the system or the establishment, which seems to rule their lives. I love that because we all still talk about the system, but we don't talk about the abstraction element. We don't talk about what history looks like in terms of abstraction from the 18th century, say, to the 19th, to the 20th. The abstraction in the modern sense becomes particularly more salient in these times, 50s, 60s, 70s, because of the proliferation of media, of TV, of the Cold War, of capitalism, of neoliberalism. Behind the scenes, if you will, all those things are doing real abstraction, which is not well understood. And Zieglerfeld, for example, breaks it down to these different dimensions. He sees, like, okay, what does that mean, the abstraction of society? Well, more alienation, which Marx talked about, more segmentation, more bureaucratization, right? More red tape, more paperwork, more desk jockeys, more institutionalization, more norms come along with that, more formalities, more procedures, rationalization, autonomization, commercialization, nationalization. These are abstractions that people participate in, especially nationalism. Right? And it keeps us, those abstractions can be useful, but they're ultimately trapping. Like a nation is an imagined community. So there's a lot of work. And coming back to at the beginning, Korzybski, consciousness of abstraction. How aware are you of your own thought processes, your own infrastructure of that? Like, what was your education? Or are you an autodidact? Like, are you an artist? How is that expressing itself? And just as an example of another book, this is a book that really, really impacted me, changed me a lot. I think it came out in 2015. It's called Inventing the Future, but it might as well have been called Abstracting the Future. That's my takeaway. There's over 100, probably a couple hundred times the word abstract comes up in this. And it's all talking about what I'm talking about capitalism, how it rules abstractly, how domination is exercised via these systems. And the authors, who are leftists, want to revitalize and reclaim abstraction as a thinking process, as a social process, so we can understand it better, and we can stop or reverse all of these negative abstraction, these vicious abstractions that dominate society. Here's part of the summary. anti-abstraction weakens the left, right? So folk political impulses, immediacy, localism, presentism, we need to embrace those things, and you'll hear some thinkers focusing on them a lot, but it's very easy to go too far, even with the right intentions, right? I just read a communist article about how lived experience is not always a reliable tool. Now, we never want to censor that or ignore it, but nothing is reducible to that, right? So we need good abstraction to overcome that, to integrate that. And this is a good book in that direction. These are a couple quotes I pulled from The Open Conspiracy by H.G. Wells. Great book in my conspiracy work, which is a different subject, different discourse. There's a lot of great sources like this, and you can see how it ties into abstraction. You can see random writers and social theorists using abstraction in this way to talk about money, to talk about the value of a map lies in the fact that it is not a model nor a picture of reality, but a reduced abstraction, sufficiently clear and sufficiently true to sorry, that I don't know, might be a typo. Sufficiently true and free from irrelevancies, so it can guide us. And just quick note on that book, like The Open Conspiracy, very ahead of its time, is a counterpoint to how we typically perceive conspiracies as closed. And systemic conspiracy is real. That's a topic for another day. But we need to understand how abstraction is operating in that. So all of that is just prelude to this idea of sociological abstraction, culture war, and political normativity. I say abstraction is not neutral. It is both the condition of possibility for thought and action and a terrain of struggle where ideas, identities, and institutions are contested. And the culture war is at bottom, if we zoom out, a war of abstractions. Words, categories, policies, beliefs, and narratives that shape how we perceive reality and decide what counts as normal, desirable, or intolerable. That gives way, circling back, I know we already talked about this, vicious versus virtuous abstraction. Virtuous simplifies without falsifying. Vicious pretends to be universal while serving narrow interests. And again, coming back to consciousness of abstracting, as written about by Bill Sharp, this one paragraph stuck out to me because it says, what happens when we misuse abstractions? In the simplest terms, just about everything, every bad thing we can imagine, from stress to insanity to crime to war, can happen. Higher order abstractions, and we're doing this all the time as philosophers, can produce vague thoughts resulting in unsubstantiated opinions, causing irresolvable conflict. Higher order abstractions have a psychoneural effect on the nervous system. And not all higher order abstractions, right? Keep in mind the context in this paragraph. We're talking about the misuse of abstractions. It can lead to psychoneural effect on the nervous system. Otherwise known as somatic, psychosomatic caused. I hate to say Peterson again, but I can't not link it to obvious examples. You know, his daughter just said he's sick and in a coma because of demons, or something like that. You know, that it's bad mojo, it's self-induced, and I think it's a bit of both. I think when we see the psychosis of that man unravel, this is why. He's somebody who has written about abstraction in what I think is an interesting way, credit where it's due, but he is really bad at it in other ways and really vicious. So anyways, moving on. It affects the nervous system, is what Sharp is saying. Deeply affects the lower centers. Produce the effects Korzybski called identification, disturbances in evaluation, confusion of orders of abstraction. In short, they can cause mental dysfunction, including insanity. We see that with fundamentalism and cults. The more you buy in to those abstractions and build your life and your community about it, the greater the risk. So we always want to zoom in and out of these layers of abstraction. I said there was no virtuous abstraction precedent, but when you Google it, I found these sorts of things. This is the word's not there, but it was in the original article, right? So the upward recovery process is the virtuous version. This is to do with urban living, managing the stress of living in a city. So you can be stressed from it. And I was living in the city, and it can send you into a downward spiral. And alternatively, to recover, you need some good environment and structure and exposure therapy to reintegrate with that. And so this source from social psychiatry talks about that. This is in the context of just how you feel about yourself. Vicious cycle. Oh, I'm not good enough. Compare myself to others. Oh, I don't belong. Compensate and have negative feelings. Judgmental, feel lonely, isolate, repeat. So it's a downward spiral. It's vicious. Virtuous is the opposite. You get the idea. And here's an example in the context of logistics. This is a little bit problematic, a little bit with respect to what I'm talking about in ethics and epistemology, because it's just saying, this is just saying, oh, good logistics is virtuous and bad logistics is vicious. But what work is that doing, right? In capitalism, we still have a lot to unpack about logistics itself and supply chains and where that goes wrong, right? Where there's regulatory capture, where there's moral hazards. But I just wanted to show you there is a precedent for this thinking, but no one has thought about it in terms of abstraction itself. And so I didn't even get through all of that, but that's fine. Just want to zoom in on this map, because this is the one slide that I have that kind of shows what I mean by that spectrum. It's not simply vicious or virtuous. There's an in-between. There's a neutral right in the middle there. But at the bottom, we have deceptive, virtuous abstraction, which in terms of, these are the categories: motive abstraction, cognitive behavior, ethical, political, and culture war example. Let me just focus on the culture war example. On the bottom level, vicious abstraction, you have white genocide myth, QAnon, Great Replacement, which is the white genocide thing, flat earth revival, Holocaust denial. Slightly up from that, we have sloganistic thinking, build the wall, defund the police. And I'm fond of defund the police, by the way. Let's be clear about that. But it's clearly a limited frame. It's problematic. It lends itself to being inverted and denied and misrepresented, unfortunately. So you can see the tug of war of abstraction just in these terms we use. Do Black Lives Matter or do all lives matter? Do we defund the police or do we fund social services and society? Coming up from that, culture war punditry, right? These are low level vicious abstractions. ESG capitalism. Forget what it's environment, sustainability, sort of thing, diversity training. Like these are the, we're approaching the kind of mainstream neoliberal band-aid solutions, greenwashing is in there somewhere. Superficial abstraction, right below neutral, is where we get all this culture war stuff. Anyways, as we move up, we have this centrist or neutral, let's say. It's not entirely neutral, obviously, but equality before the law, free market as efficient coordination, personal responsibility. These are very common memes or tropes, if you will. We all believe in to some degree, even if you're anti-capitalist. And as I'm arguing, as we go higher into reflective and then integrative abstraction, virtuous abstraction, luminal abstraction, if you will, and forgive the indulgence there, but these are the terms that we come up with. A lot of this is just generated. It can be modified, of course. And a lot of this reflects my ongoing dialectic working relationship with AI, right? Because I wrote about humanizing AI years ago. And the message of that is how, just as it says, we need to remain in control of AI. But sometimes AI knows better. We've already crossed that Rubicon, right? So it's a dance. At any rate, let me finish the line of thinking here. Intersectional feminism, restorative justice. These are climate justice. These are virtuous abstractions because they make sense. They're true. They have positive ethical implications. Truth and reconciliation frameworks, post-capitalist eco-social democracy, peace, industrial design, etc. So it is a spectrum. It's messy, but it doesn't have to be mystified. Very quickly, we're not talking about metamodernism today, but there are three major schools, and they have, this could also be a Venn diagram, and I visualized it other ways, such as this. But I'm not going to go into that. I'm just going to say this is an abstraction. This is one abstraction I made, and so is this. And it is intended to foster clarity and veracity and stimulate critical thinking. So I think we're doing good for time. Just a few more keyframes to get through, and then I'll zoom out. Right here, the word vicious cycle. This is why I included this. This is a kind of vicious versus virtuous framing. And it's interesting. Here's our starting point. If we have leadership that does not respect individuals or lead with humility, and that leadership emphasizes command and control, we're going to get poor quality because of this cycle. And this is to do with organizational dynamics. So take it in that context, but it's, leads to low customer satisfaction. We're not customers when it comes to ideas. I don't want anyone to get that idea, but I think this is a useful, again, abstraction. It may be flawed. It may be used in different ways. Consequences, reduced profit margin, like, with ideas and truth and justice, we're not talking about profit margin. So it's a different language, a different discourse, but, there it is anyways. So, okay, this is kind of where I want to tie off things. Oh, we got so many more slides to go with. abstraction meta theory. This is actually, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because I want to get into the more interactive Q&A part with who's here. But the top left there, it's a bit hard to read. It says matter and energy. So across this row, it's kind of directional. Starts with perception, sensing matter, and it ends with engineering as enactment. So computational physics kind of there in the middle. I mean, make of it what you will, but this is a great way to zoom out and have a map of abstraction. But yeah, when I say I want to end with this, I started talking about this stack there. Actually, I'll just go here. This stack. This is a different stack. This is types of abstraction, less based on that stack, because these all kind of take place in the socio-cultural conceptual layers. But these are the major, you know, everything I've set up to this point has been more or less introductory. This is the more advanced stuff. There's 11 forms here. Already touched on some of these names, but each major form has a major domain, has a major function, potential risk, and emancipatory potential. So relating to my metamodern politics talk, there's a way to organize this, give it a score if you want. And that's what this does. If I click this tab, you can show how they're scored immediately. This one is already ordered, or no, it's not ordered. Okay, now it is. If I click that. So at the very bottom of this list of examples, we have climate denial abstraction. It obscures responsibility and ecological limits. And this has been written about. I wrote about the abstraction of pollution, abstraction of water. Many people have written about climate denial as abstraction. Financial abstraction typically has negative associations because who does it benefit? What does it do? What does it function as? Each one of these has their own card, right? So we could dive in. Who are the major thinkers? David Harvey. What's the domain context? What's the risk mitigation? What's the emancipatory potential? Yeah, I didn't want to talk about this. I didn't want to start here because it's quite advanced, in my opinion. Abstract society. You know, the risks, it requires countermeasures. The opportunity, you know, is lending to critical awareness. What are the practical applications? Critiquing bureaucratic alienation, advocating for human scale institutions, resisting rationalization, preserving life world, against system colonization. So there's a lot of detail here, a lot of different conceptual foundations, the real abstraction, cartographic, spatial, algorithmic, scientific. Some of these overlap a lot. There's redundancy that was not necessary. That's how we got from originally 11 in this to I added a few more last night. Because I could, you know, we can generate those things. So this is all like projects in motion too. Like this stuff can keep evolving beyond this point. Since I've been going for over an hour, I do want to kind of take a pause, see if anybody has any questions. You can zoom out to the big picture. I was telling Tom before we got started, I had a screenshot folder that I found these all just in a row. So I pasted them all. They're just random pages from different social theory and whatnot that discusses abstraction. And I have a lot of that. And I was telling Tom, like, I can take all these images, drop it into an LLM, and it'll read them all. And, you can do whatever you want with that. But abstraction is everywhere. And I actually have a kind of mystical knack, if you will, that this happens to me a lot. I'll pick up a book, I'll flip through it. It can be any book. And I come upon the word abstract. It's kind of synchronicity. And that's one of the things that made me think, like, wow, this is everywhere. And I know what it means. We all know what it means on a very simple level. But what does it mean, like, in the transcendent sense, in the absolute? What does it mean in all these different contexts, all these different fields? I didn't even talk about this, but there's this book called What's What, and it's a visual glossary of the physical world. So it takes anything you could imagine and just breaks it down into its constituent elements with labels. And I think this is how we learn as we are young people, children being enculturated into the world. You could call this nominalism, just naming everything, but it's so important. It has so much salience. And I found this book at a thrift store, not this edition, but same book. And I just love it because it illuminates different forms of abstraction. This is another similar thing. I have this book, Human Dimension and Interior Space. And it's like, what if the Vitruvian Man was its own textbook? And in the context of ergonomics, like not just what is the shape of a human being, but what is the shape of the environments that we design. So that's all there in a book like that. I love that stuff. Here we have a sort of executive summary of my abstraction paradigm. I just threw the PDF in there. If you have questions, just throw them in. What else? So yeah, there's all that. I'll end with this just for fun, because this is a global meta crisis tracker simulator that is in development, and obviously it's a way of abstracting a particular thing. It's not Google Earth. It's custom. It's a custom aesthetic. It's a custom function to focus on these meta crisis things and how they're interrelated. And yeah, more to come on that as I build out the database. We don't want to see that. That's a lecture for another day. How about this? If anyone has any ideas, this is also a tool I built. Let's look at, let's just say manufacturing consent as a seed concept. It's the title of a book, of course, but what this does, it's going to generate a node with 5 limbs, if you will. Okay, manufacturing consent. Well, here it's all these things. It's propaganda techniques. It's media monopoly and information control. It's consumer culture and manufactured desires. The role of social media. Let's just take one. Let's take media monopoly and information, and zoom in on it. Double click it. It's going to give us a definition, and it's also going to generate more nodes. Explore how media ownership concentrates impacts the diversity of viewpoints and narrative framing. And so under media monopoly, we have grassroots journalism as a counterbalance, algorithmic gatekeeping, influence of media oligarchies. Fox News comes to mind. Regulatory policies. So you can just influence of media oligarchies. You could just, infinitely dive in, almost like a Wikipedia kind of format, into deeper and deeper orders and categories of abstraction. Is slop, Alan says, is slop an example of vicious abstraction? Short answer, yes, I guess. Um, it could be neutral. It could be entertaining. Slop. Certainly, the short answer is yeah. We could probably unpack that, but I think it's kind of obvious what's implied there. Slop is slop. I'm finding that discourse fascinating. Like, it's easy to generate, and it's everywhere now. It's ubiquitous. Whether it's text generation or image generation, there's this idea of flooding the zone with low coherence information. Or if nothing else, like, it could have coherence, but it's a slurry. You know, it's taking ideas and blending them, hence the kind of slop you get. So, you know, what we do with that slop also can have virtuous or vicious outcomes. What else? Oh, I meant to start off with this too. Just Googling it, a few weeks ago, I found 3 articles. One on Coursera, what is abstract thinking and how to cultivate it. Scroll down, visualizing, comparison, criticism, imagination, philosophy, prediction, problem solving. You know, there it is. You don't need me to teach that level of it because it's everywhere. Why abstract thinking is the cognitive superpower we keep underrating. That sounds like a good article. Why does every intelligent visionary use abstract and symbolic reasoning in their innovative thinking? Another good one. So, you know, that's out there. That's the kind of hook, I think. If you want to learn to think better, you got to work on it. It's an endless process, but it's also just the beginning. Because abstraction is all this, you know. So again, what I want people to take away, and as we move into a discussion, like, how are we iteratively vetting our own personal and our collective abstraction to get closer to truth? Because we live in a post-truth time and era and context, but that is contrived. That is manufactured, right? Because we have more knowledge than we've ever had. So inevitably, here's the knowledge curve. We have more knowledge than ever. And this is from a different website. This is Ralph Kenyon of Xenodoki, great source. But he says, Korzybski is actually out of date. He was writing in 1933. Knowledge growth actually tracks with Moore's law. So not only do we have an explosion of computer power, we have an explosion of knowledge, an overwhelming amount. In fact, we need to distill it and abstract it back down to make sense of it. But I want to highlight this so people understand, how can we be so dumb when there is so much knowledge? So the takeaway I want people to have, of course, is this idea of epistemic humility, which has been much talked about, but that I don't think is effectively practiced enough. Like, we can be epistemically humble, and also have convictions at the same time. So keeping all this in mind, and keeping in mind the ethical and epistemological dimensions, we can have better abstraction. And that's part of the reason I'm doing it here with Tom on Tom's platform, is to hone my teaching skills, but also like encourage self-auditing, and a lot of people, they're not going to do it themselves, but in these liminal spaces, there's a mix. There's a lot of good thinking, a lot of smart people, and there is some vicious abstraction trickled throughout that. So I think through, abstraction is the problem and it's the solution. It always comes back to that kind of irony. Yeah. So should I stop sharing and we'll kind of go into the like face talking mode? Okay, stop. Okay. Hi, how's everybody doing? Let's have a round table. A few people here I know, a few people I don't know. I welcome your thoughts and your feedback. We all abstract. And what questions you have? What are your takeaways? Did I leave anything out?
I could take a lead as the last person to join this meeting. I unfortunately didn't remember the timing until just shortly toward the end of your presentation. But I'm deeply interested in this whole area. And just for an orientation, there's two things I'm bringing in. One is I'd be very interested in hearing why everybody is here in relation to the concept of abstraction, which would give me orientation to who's in the room. And I appreciated you, Brent, actually saying, I'm doing this on Tom's platform to hone my teaching skills, which are obviously already incredible. And the material that I did see, I really value. To introduce myself, I'm kind of host of a community of sense making that has nodes of people who live together and are in long time relationship, not just romantic relationship or parenting relationship, but friend and colleague going back to 30 years. And my turn on in this area was finding Korzybski in the public library back in the beginning of the 1960s. So it's been an anchor for me making sense of this whole field for many decades. And where I'm at now is I've put forth the concept of what I call abstragmatics, which is a practice of connecting the various levels of abstraction in ways that actually allow us to navigate daily life together and sense making and livelihood. And so the materials that you're bringing in here add more to my arsenal in doing this. So that's why I'm here.
Thank you. That's really helpful. And yeah, I'm happy for you and anybody that's coming into this from a particular angle. Like Korzybski is a good one, because as I showed in that article in those excerpts, and again, people should check that out. It's such a wonderful introduction, but one of the key words there is not just abstraction itself, but general semantics, right? That's what we get from Korzybski. And yeah, so there's so many starting points, as I was kind of alluding to, like throughout history of philosophy and social philosophers, hundreds, right? Almost every philosopher has used the word, if not unpacked it a little bit more. So there's something aesthetically rewarding about seeing it everywhere, like looking at abstract art. It may do something for you, it may not. Abstract art is one of those funny things that is supposed to stimulate thinking, and it may or may not. And I've done it as well. I've made some abstract art for fun. And that's part of the praxis of keeping it alive in that holistic sense. Because when I do intellectual abstraction, when any of us do, we're doing something very different. But it's all like part of the same metaphysical fabric of reality, if you will, that our brains are doing the abstraction, and we're along for the ride. So thank you. Who else?
Oh, I'll just mention that I'm in Kitchener-Waterloo, Ontario.
Okay, cool. I'm in British Columbia, so we're both in Canada. One second, what's going on? I think I spotlighted myself. Anybody? Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, I'm from Argentina. I'm a petroleum engineer. I'm kind of sick and tired of seeing projects failure due to modelizing idealizations, using the wrong models. And I think that the problems came from even an abstraction like of a misabstraction framing, and this might help me to be able to communicate that better, and to try to handle the resistance, And I also was wondering, what do you mean about emancipatory potential of the abstractions? What do you exactly mean? Because it has a lot of meaning for me, Depends on.
Yeah. Let me first say it's cool that you're an engineer, because I kind of touched on that. Like I'm not an engineer, but I'm fascinated by it, and especially like civil engineering, because a skyscraper, a bridge, it's got to have a certain design and form and materials to work, but it also has to have a particular social function and purpose. Speaking of bridges, they need to withstand earthquakes. They need to not incentivize suicide. Like, we need to consider all these things, right? The word bridge is a metaphor. So through the abstract lens, we can understand deeper. That's why it's so important to not get stuck in one level or one mode of abstraction, or it's a good thing to have a division of labor when you have too much complexity. So, different people have to do different things. But answering your question about the emancipatory potential, maybe it's over here. Here we go. So yeah, emancipatory potential. Okay. So I used those terms when I was talking about these discourses. And they have a score, if you will. They have this kind of scoring because climate denial is the example I gave at the bottom. That is keeping us stuck and oppressed. That's the opposite of emancipation. So the emancipatory potential of having better climate and science literacy is potentially very high, but the current status of that discourse is negative. Whether by choice or by default, the highest levels of abstraction are Sharp's constitutive abstraction and Bratton's metascales of abstraction. Those I find to be very high and more emancipatory and philosophical. The more you do it, the more you can liberate yourself from bad abstractions, limited ideas and frames that leak or that mislead us. And, let's talk about the Bible, for example. It's a type of symbolic and cultural abstraction. If you understand that or consider it only on a literal level, that's not going to be very emancipatory. That's going to be dogmatic. You're going to be stuck by that, and you're going to be guided to certain beliefs and behaviors that are not emancipatory. Liberation theology, on the other hand, is a way of reinterpreting all of that, all of religion, through emancipatory lenses and praxis. So that's what I mean. And the numbers, the scores are a little bit arbitrary. We can debate, but I'm just trying to show that there are ways we can sort of rate and track the opportunity cost of different ideas. And yeah, I hope that kind of answers the question there.
Okay, thanks.
Oh, are you guys seeing my? Yes, you are seeing my screen share. Okay, so I'll stop sharing that just so you can see me again. Okay, so yeah, I want all of this to be emancipatory. We're all very stuck in abstraction, I think. So okay, Alan Hill says, how might I relate this to metaphor and the work of people like George Lakoff? I'm definitely familiar. I don't think I have anything in the slides about that, but I don't have a simple ready answer, but I'd be interested, Alan, what your thoughts are as well, because it definitely relates. I'm sure we could find quotes about abstraction in Lakoff. I remember him writing something, him or someone adjacent to him, something useful about political cognition. So that would be my answer. That's what I'd want to dive into. And T says, do I think AI is capable of abstraction? Short answer, yes, absolutely. Because if you Google it, abstraction is the central concept of computer science. And it is also, by extension, the central concept in artificial intelligence. And we are teaching AI how to abstract through its visual. Now we have visual operability, like it can read text from an image. It can identify things in a picture. We are right now on the cusp of crazy multimodal AI, where you join all these different functions together, and it can do a lot of crazy things. But AI is essentially abstraction, and programmers. I'm not a programmer, but I am a vibe coder now, and what programmers are doing is basically, in their own terms, abstraction. Every layer is an abstraction. In fact, I think on my diagram, I have a good image that shows what I'm talking about. This one. I don't have the source handy, but this is literally an abstraction of AI abstraction, of computer science, of how it's predicated on the material, the silicon chip, and executable layer, program layer, task level models. I mean, and there's a million ways you can diagram and slice this sort of stuff. But where else? Oh, there's one image I think I had trouble importing, but it was just basically showing for problem solving. you start at a concrete level, and then abstract up, try to solve the problem in the abstract, and then try to translate back down to the concrete level. And so we're constantly doing this up and down as we problem solve, or as we build a thing, or as we fix a thing, anything that involves numerous steps. Even as we cook, cooking as recipes and all the different processes that go into food production. I'm getting my hands dirty a little bit in the garden. I'm growing strawberries, grapes, tomatoes, cannabis, apples. And then what do I do with that? This is where I find interesting interplay with thinking and practical abstraction. I think a lot. I recognize the traps and liabilities of that, but where it matters, coming to virtuous abstraction, is where the rubber hits the road. Is the meal you cook, is it healthy? Does it taste good? Those are the things that matter to evaluate it. Those are the criteria. And you can get creative with it. There's a science to it, and it makes me, Gene, you said you're an engineer, but it takes me back to ancient times. I'm fascinated by ancient stuff. How did they figure out agriculture? It was in their version of science, trial and error, and but we don't have all the knowledge of that, how megalithic architecture was built, how lifestyles built around fishing, hunting, gathering, culture. It's that's the rabbit hole of abstraction that we're still untangling that today. Like I said at the beginning, there's a lot of bad abstraction in the world. And it's important to recognize where we're bad at it, where our blind spots are. I'm not very knowledgeable about cooking, and not that experienced. I've made various things, but it's not something I put a lot of time into. So the more we put time into these different modes of abstraction, the more we can get out of it. And we can judge ourselves, we can evaluate the quality of what we're doing, as we should, without beating ourselves up and criticizing ourselves to death. I'm bad at math, therefore I suck at abstraction. It's way more nuanced than that. We all have the capacity to learn just about anything. But there's only so much time and so much context. Human kitchening starts with fires and caves. Yeah, this is primordial stuff in the sense of our deep past. So there's also a book called Abstraction and Aging, which just another of many books that's taking this idea, this thesis of abstraction, and running it through the thesis, through the machine. And in that book, in that case, it's about early childhood development and how our brains change over time, how malleable and the plasticity of them. So I find it all endlessly fascinating and interconnected. The point where abstraction breaks down into the empirical non-abstraction, and all of this can go out the window, really requires good human abstracting. Yeah, and let me say something I don't think I talked about, but emotional intelligence is one other form of many types of intelligences. We now know IQ as an abstraction is vicious. We know that now. That doesn't mean it's completely useless. I was thinking about this over the last couple of days. It's worthwhile, if you want to get smarter in the dimensions of IQ, studying and taking tests. However, right, the real wisdom in doing so is not just to increase your ratiocination and logical thinking, but knowing that IQ has been used for racism or is a racist metric is a higher level of understanding that. And it's a great example because this is where the whole discourse promoted by the intellectual dark web would break down. There was an over-reliance on those types of abstractions at the expense of critiques and of a more nuanced reality breaking through. So emotional intelligence is needed. And really, like, the more people who can do more multimodal abstraction, the better, right? Like everything I've presented today is collective knowledge. It's not mine. It's not, I mean, a lot of it is sort of through a proprietary lens or framework I'm creating. But if it wasn't research-based, which it is, I would just be making it up. So this is, where it matters in 2025. Like, what we're doing with critical thinking is both a cumulative project, like building on top of critical theory from the 1930s and stuff, but it's also reflexive and it's constantly evolving and adapting. And I think when social theorists and leftists, and even the best of us, when we go back in time and we talk about these things like critical theory and fascism and Marxism, and we are jumping through history to those time periods and those ideas. And we think we're making sense, and we certainly are to some degree, but I think you can see the way I'm trying to reveal it, we're also getting very messy, and we're jumping around orders of abstraction and contexts, and where the rubber hits the road is how do we come out of that? So the question from T, how would pedagogies build on and implement this through schools, education, and learning practices? So yeah, there's already a lot of discourse around pedagogy of the oppressed, the whole decolonialism approach. There's various approaches to learning, like self-directed learning is a much bigger thing now. I am not a huge proponent of homeschooling for a whole host of reasons. Because, least not because I am a proponent of better public schools. Everybody knows we have an education system that, as good as it is compared to it never existing in the past, it's still very flawed. It, at worst, kind of shoehorns people into being a worker and an automaton in society. So, and it does not foster preparedness for the real world. And that's not the fault of education. I want to be clear about that. That's the fault of the society that we graduate into. So yeah, this is why we need consciousness of abstracting at a level of discourse, of social policy, so we can actually like stop wasting time, stop having regressive policy. Like if we're going to talk about education and classrooms in America, we've got to talk about school shootings too. And how vicious that is. The Second Amendment, the distortion of the discourse, all extremely vicious in the ethical sense, in the intellectual sense. So when I see pundits and activists out there and advocates fighting for this stuff, we see them constantly being misrepresented, and yeah, just denied And it just leads to worse, more of the same outcomes. And process thinking, yeah, like this is an endless process. We're products of abstraction, as I said. We come into the world through process. There's many discourses around process philosophy, religion, etc. And Whitehead talked about abstraction. I didn't even really get into that, but it's all there. As I said, almost every social theorist has touched on it. So that we're in that process. Today was a process, and we're still very far from a paradigm. If I'm to talk a little bit about paradigm, a lot of people just go to, Thomas Kuhn, Structure of Scientific Revolutions. That's fine in a very entry-level sense, right? Like, okay, a paradigm shifts when enough anomalies mount and enough people agree that they have a better explanatory framework, and it overturns the old. But the truth is there's critiques of that. There's more nuanced versions of that. And so we always got to like recognize, okay, first of all, what is the minimum viable abstraction? That's another thing I'm kind of theorizing. I didn't really get into, but you get a sense of it. What's our starting point? And then how far can we go with it? So like a paradigm shift, that's an overused term, and it's a very disputed term, as it should be, because I think there's a lot of people that use it so loosely that it kind of loses coherence. And so we're not actually seeing a paradigm shift. We can wax about it, how like through New Ageism and, the world's changing, people are changing. Or we can even kind of get overconfident about it. Like, okay, yeah, let's have a paradigm shift. I know what it is. It's, it's this and this and this. I mean, for me, I always bring it back to indisputable basics, things we don't have yet. Universal healthcare, universal education. Like, there is no paradigm shift if we're not talking about those things. If we're just talking about technology evolving and those sorts of paradigms, like an AI paradigm shift. Well, so what? So what factor is always going to rear its ugly head. We're well into the fourth industrial revolution. So what? There's a genocide happening, right now, even despite a ceasefire. And it's a war on ideas at the end of the day. It's a war on abstractions. It's a war on our moral and emotional and intellectual capacity to envision something better than an apartheid state. Sorry, I shouldn't go too much in that direction. I know. Tom and I may disagree. So that's a lecture for another day. I call Israel politique, but I just think it's a good example. I think we always, need to bring things back to the concrete. And what does that mean? Well, let's link it to current events and the most relevant ongoing discourse and events. It's that's one of many things. So, so one other point, we're coming up on 2 hours, but we're all good thinkers, let's say, to some degree. There's a lot of genius and intelligence in these spaces. But one thing I see we all do, myself included, and I've become conscious of it and more wary of it, is we need to not just appropriate works for our own purposes. And I say that because I don't want my work on this, everything I've told you guys today, to be appropriated or misappropriated. Case in, again, Israel, but I had a guy that I debated with like a year and a half ago. And I analyzed that debate and everything, and he blocked me. We lost touch. And I crossed paths with him again on Facebook recently in the past week. And we got into it again. And the irony was he shared with me a link about epistemic justice. Now, epistemic justice or epistemic injustice is a field that's like 15, 20 years old now. And when I formed my think tank in 2016, I made it a cornerstone of the research policy that we need epistemic justice. We need testimonial and hermeneutic justice. And that field helps illuminate that. He was using it as an example to defend his position and his narrative and his Zionism. And the irony of that is the misappropriation for him taking that tool to say, oh, but I'm not being heard. And so on the surface, that actually makes sense. He's using it correctly on the surface. But the depth of that requires enormous unpacking. And that's like something I would want to debate with him. Like, oh, you're appropriating this discourse. So we need to obviously critique me where I'm wrong. But when we look at someone's work or a book that we are citing, and sometimes we're only citing one idea, sometimes we're citing the big idea, we need to be super careful we're not carrying over their mistakes if they made mistakes, or we're not introducing mistakes that they didn't make. So, this is why I say, even at the PhD level, there's a lot of, unfortunately, bad abstraction, because it is very difficult. I don't know how else to say it. I'm at my limits. Sometimes I'm in the clouds. Sometimes I'm hyper-focused and lucid. But all these models and theories, right? The map is not the territory. They only have so much value insofar as we can come back to the concrete. What does it say about the concrete? Does this policy we're talking about actually lend to the ending of homelessness? What does it require in changes in the abstraction of law? Do we make food a universal free human right, which the United States voted against? This is why abstraction is a collective, ethical necessity and imperative. If we're going to call ourselves thinkers, we have a duty to keep following through on that process. And I've never been in a cult, or I don't have a lot of personal experience with that, but nothing makes me happier than seeing somebody who has deconstructed their life and is using their own biography and critical reflection to teach that. Oh, I used to be racist. I used to be in the KKK. Now I'm not. I used to be this. I used to be that. That is so powerful, and more people have to do that. And I'm not trying to avoid doing it myself, but we can only sort of draw on our experience and our knowledge in that regard. So yeah, I'd love to see how this scales in a bigger group, a more diverse group, because I certainly have a lot of detractors out there, but I can find value in just about everyone's abstraction, even if I criticize them, and hopefully vice versa, right? And we can try to come together more. We can actually, rather than individualism, collectivism just being ideas and ideologies, we can live them. You can have an individual life, but you should also have a collective life. And that collective life should not just entail, oh, I'm a proud, patriotic American. No, you can be a global citizen. You can be cosmopolitan in your thinking and in your values. So yeah, I know we're up on 2 hours. So what do you say, Tom?
Oh, I love it. That was fantastic. And I hope the people that participated got something out of it. It's like I had, recently a talk with Bart basically about the difference about Verstand and Vernunft, these German words that don't really have a translation in English.
Okay.
And so Verstand,
I don't, yeah, go ahead.
And so Verstand is, you know, basically that what you describe as, you know, abstraction, as that, as the rational kind of way of dealing with all these concepts, you know, and to look at it and kind of shifting that around. Vernunft is something different, and you mentioned that too. It means there's this wisdom aspect coming in, and there's like this aspect, and so Vernunft is the ability to know when to use Verstand, basically. So you talked about epistemic humility, that would be more of a Vernunft kind of thing, right? And so, because, you know, at the end of the day, you know, we make mistakes. We use the wrong abstractions. We use, you know, bad ones. We use good ones, and so we need discourse. And in order to have discourse, we need Vernunft. You know, that means the ability to say, well, you know, I might be wrong, you might be wrong. It's like we might have different opinions, but we're working on the same thing because we're getting at that from different vantage point, but we want something. And so this is like where Verstand and Vernunft go hand in hand. And so what I really liked about your presentation and your lectures, that you kind of brought this kind of together, because we might sometimes get lost in this Verstand and abstraction aspect. But there's also this kind of other thing, you know, how do we interrelate with people, and how do we deal with, you know, bad concepts and bad abstractions, all of this. And so there's this kind of, you know, epistemic humility. So even if I, from my vantage point, do the best I can, that doesn't mean that I'm right. Right? And I have to extend this courtesy of Vernunft to the other person as well. Right? And so, are you still there?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Sorry.
And so I love that. So thank Brent. That was amazing. That was very good.
Yeah. I just, you guys can see the screen. You can see my screen share.
Yes.
Sure.
I just brought it up to do this one thing, which is zoom in on the space there and just say everything is abstraction. And abstraction is everything. And like, I don't know if you can feel that, but that's salient, I think. And that's what I try to capture, you know, through this. And of course, my presentation is limited at the end of the day, and it's evolving, but there it is. It's everything, and it's everywhere.
Yeah. What's curious to me is that according to neuroscience, our perception of the world is sensory, and then it provides the raw sensory data that is then simplified and reorganized into concepts, right? So for me too, understanding the raw data and seeing the connection between the subconscious and the conscious is one of the most fundamentally freeing and liberating.
Yeah. That's great, Carolina. I don't know if you cut out there, but definitely a lot could be said with that. That's a very important kind of liminal edge, and you're absolutely right. Like, and there's a lot written about it. Like, the more you just read about that stuff, then it kind of like lights up those parts of your brain. It's like, oh my God, like all this like sensory, you know, that's where empiricism comes from. How am I getting the data, you know, with my eyes, with my ears, with our nose, with touch, or, you know, our thinking faculty. Oh, I think we lost her. But awareness of that, I'll just say, is very useful in meditation, in like somatic therapy, and yeah, that's a good edge to hang out on.
We got it, no?
Yeah, I think we got it. Yeah, thanks everybody for coming, and I'd love, thanks for the encouragement on sort of my presentation style and whatnot. I want to encourage good abstraction across the board, and I think we can. This is where, like, it's a big article of faith for me. Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity to unpack it.
Fantastic, Brent. Thank you, everybody, for joining in.